Charizard EX is already looking to be one of, if not the best deck of the new post-rotation format. But with the release of Torterra EX from Temporal Forces, a tanky new stage 2 that has its own built-in engine and hits for solid damage, could we finally have the best way to counter Charizard EX? Today at the request of Fred over on Patreon, I'll be breaking down my current deck list for this new rogue Torterra EX deck. And if you want to put in your request for any decks you'd like me to cover in the future, feel free to check out the Rare Candy Patreon. Link will be down below in the description. But with that being said, be sure to smack that like button to feed that always hungry YouTube algorithm, and let's check out my current deck list for Torterra EX. So of course, to start with, we have 4 copies of Turtwig here, and this one's actually a new one that we're getting in Temporal Forces, which I do think is probably our best one going forward. Really just because it has this ability that reduces damage to it by 20. The important card this really protects against is going to be Radiant Greninja. That means a double Moonlight Shuriken can't knock out 2 of your Turtwigs, unless they're doing some weird stuff with extra damage counter placing and canceling Cologne and stuff like that. From there, we have 4 copies of Grotle, and really, I'm not sure if this deck would function without this card. This is going to be the one back from Brilliant Stars with the Sun-Drenched Shell ability that allows you to search a grass Pokemon out of your deck and put it into your hand. So whereas other Stage 2 decks like Charizard are more reliant on things like rare candies to get up and going, we're really just trying to evolve through these Grotles just because we can sort of chain one to get the next one, and so on and so forth to get the rest of our grass Pokemon. And then from there, we have the big guy himself, Torterra EX. As you see, it clocks in with a massive 340 HP, which means this guy is going to be out of one-shot range of at least a lot of Pokemon in the format, though not all. But really the attack we're building around is going to be this first one for a single grass energy. It is 30 for each grass Pokemon you have in play. So with a full bench, we're going to be hitting for 180 damage, which might not seem like a lot, but the big upside is that with weakness, we can actually one-shot Charizard EX. And then from there, in most other matchups, we're just going to be kind of content two-shotting things, as long as we're not going against decks that can one-shot us. But for those situations, we do need a little bit of help. And that's why we're playing a few different Toedscruel cards. And though I don't think it matters too much, this is going to be the Toedscruel we are playing for the moment. This one's from Paradox Rift. It has an attack that lets you accelerate a grass energy from hand to one of your Pokemon. There is also another one that puts your opponent asleep, but unfortunately that one has a 2 retreat cost, so that's why we're going to be rolling with this one. More importantly though, we have a copy of Toedscruel EX here, and we're going to be playing it for this ability that prevents any effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to yours that have energy attached. So this is going to help stop some of those one-hit KO attacks in the format, like Star Requiem on Giratina V-Star, or Frenzied Gouging on Roaring Moon EX. And then we also have a copy of the Toedscruel from Paradox Rift. It stops cards in your opponent's discard from being put into their hands via a trainer card or an ability. So this is going to stop decks like Chien-Pao from playing superior energy retrieval to get back their energy. But I think the other big card that this is going to shut down is going to be Pokestop. Golden Goat EX also plays a lot of these same cards as Chien-Pao, and we're seeing a lot of the ancient decks in particular really make use of Pokestop, whether it's Roaring Moon EX, the new Baby Roaring Moon, or even the new Raging Bolt EX. And again, all of these decks really do have ways to get around your Torterra's massive HP, so you need to have a way to shut those off to give yourself a chance in those matchups. As you'll see, we're also playing a Robscott in the deck, and I will point out this Rellor probably is the best one we have, but more importantly, we have this new Robscott. Its ability prevents all damage and effects of attacks done to your bench Pokemon. So because Torterra sort of forces us to only be able to play grass Pokemon, that means we can't really play cards like Manaphy or Jirachi to protect against some of these damage sniping attacks that are in the format. And though you won't use it often, this attack on Robscott honestly isn't that bad either. It does 10 plus 30 for each energy on your opponent's active Pokemon. So if you are unlucky enough to hit a Charizard list that is playing something like an Entei, you are unfortunately going to have to two-shot them, and something like Robscott can sort of force your opponent into a 7-prize game. It's definitely not an answer for multiple Entei, but I think you can get around one with this strategy. And our final Pokemon of the deck is going to be one copy of Radiant Venusaur. Its ability says at the end of your turn, you get to draw until you have 4 cards in your hand. This is very much so we have Burrell at home sort of energy, but it's the best option the deck has, and I think you probably still need to play it over something like Radiant Serena. But going into our trainer cards, we have 4 copies of Arven. This is going to be our primary supporter of the deck, but of course Arven allows us to get an item and a tool, put them into our hand. And even though we're really not seeing a lot of cards in a turn, you have to think our Grottles are going to be able to find basically any of our Pokemon for us at any given point. Then from there, we basically just cherry pick the other 2 cards that we need for turn with Arven, and then from there we just refill our hand with Venusaur at the end of our turn. But next up from there, we have 3 copies of Iono to force both players to shuffle their hands, put them at the bottom of their deck, and draw for each prize they have remaining. From there, we have 2 copies of Professor Turo's Scenario. You put one of your Pokemon in play into your hand and discard any other cards attached to them. And Turo really serves a couple of different uses. The main one is going to be as a sort of pseudo healing card. If we do pick up Torterra, we just re-evolve from one of our other Grottles on the field and reattach a single energy to keep attacking. I do think there is a world where you could cut Turo to maybe play the new Whimsicott for a similar healing effect, but ultimately right now at least I'm playing Turo just because it does act as a sort of switching card as well. And our final supporter card is just 1 copy of Boss's Orders. It is a pretty low count of Boss's Orders, but as you'll see once we get into our items, we do play some other gusting effects that are going to be probably a little bit better for our deck. For our stadium of choice, we have 2 copies of Artisan. There's definitely other stadiums that are kind of okay, but I think this is definitely our best one since it helps us find our basic Pokemon, which in turn helps fuel our Torterra's attacks. But getting into our item cards, we have a ton of Pokemon search cards. To start with, we have 4 Nest Balls just to find our basic Pokemon. From there, 4 copies of Ultra Ball. We really need to make sure that we can hit Grotle on turn 2, and Ultra Ball is just the best way to guarantee that. And even though we do have to discard 2 cards from our hand to play it, we don't really mind since we're trying to end our turn every turn anyways by being able to refill our hand with Radiant Venusaur. From there, we have 2 copies of Capturing Aroma. We flip a coin. If heads, we get an evolution, and if tails, we get a basic. Most of the time, you really don't mind hitting either one, just because between this and a Grotle for turn, you can usually find a basic and evolution if that's what you need. We have Hisuian Heavy Ball to be able to get a basic Pokemon out of our prize cards. I think we play, 8 basics in total with this deck? So prizing some definitely could hurt our total damage output. And finally, we have a single copy of the new Buddy Poffin. So one thing that is a little bit of a bummer about Turtwig, its HP that it has means that it's not going to be searchable by Buddy Poffin, which can only get 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less. But that being said, we still do play a few of those cards. We have the Toedscool, as well as the Reller. So on turn 1, if we already have a way to get a Turtwig, we can just Arven for Buddy Poffin to grab 2 Pokemon instead of grabbing a Nest Ball to grab a single one. From there, we have 2 copies of Rare Candy in the deck. Grotle is definitely going to be the main way we are evolving, but there are going to be times where it might be useful to skip our Grotle and just go straight into Torterra EX. Even though it is a low count of Rare Candy, of course guys, we have our 4 Arvens, so we can grab these on the few turns that we might need them. We also have 2 copies of Super Rod to shuffle some energy and Pokemon back into our deck, which of course is super important for a deck like this because of our damage output being directly tied to the amount of Pokemon that we have in play. Next up, 2 copies of Counter Catcher. So instead of playing a heavy count of Boss's Orders, we're playing 2 Counter Catchers since it does the same thing if we are behind on prizes. We have a copy of Switch. Our Pokemon are pretty big and clunky guys, so we probably need at least one way to move these things out of the active from time to time. Next up, we have a copy of Earthen Vessel, where we discard a card from our hand and search our deck for 2 basic energies. And if we don't currently have energy in hand, we do need a way to be able to search it out with our Arven. For that same reason, we also have a copy of Energy Search. Earthen Vessel is definitely nice for those turns where we do want to play down our hand a little bit more, but if there's not anything we really want to discard, we can always just fall back on Energy Search instead. But getting into our Pokemon tool cards, we have 2 copies of TM Evolution. The Pokemon it's attached to gains an attack for a single energy that lets you search your deck for an evolution of 2 of your bench Pokemon and immediately evolve them. If we open with Arven, we can just immediately grab this TM Evolution to be able to get a Grotle into play as early as turn 1. But also because we can't play Manaphy to protect our bench, we would normally have to wait an entire turn to be able to get our Robscott into play. So if you want to think about it this way, TM Evolution kind of turns your Robscott into a Manaphy in a way. And for our only other Pokemon tool, we're playing the brand new Hero's Cape, where it gives the Pokemon it's attached to an additional 100 HP. Obviously, the big combo here is you can put it on Torterra and give it an insane 440 HP. But much like with TM Evo, it also can sort of act as a defensive card to protect your bench Pokemon from attacks of Radiant Greninja. And to round out our deck list, just 6 copies of basic Grass Energy. This might not seem like a lot of energy, but you have to remember our Torterra only attacks for a single grass energy. We can recycle these throughout the course of a game with Super Rod, and also we have our Energy Search and Earthen Vessel to sort of act as a 7 1/8 out to an energy. But that's going to wrap up my current deck list for Torterra EX. I think Torterra is a pretty cool new attacker we're getting, but right now I think the big issue I'm running into with this deck is just the amount of other decks that can still one-hit KO you, especially if we see Charizard decks running NTV. What was previously probably your best matchup now gets really bad. But if Charizard lists do shy away from that as an inclusion, Torterra definitely could have a real shot at being a rogue deck in the format. But of course, guys, I want to hear your thoughts today. What do you think about this deck list? Are there any other grass Pokemon you would include in Torterra going forward? Do you think this deck even has potential at all? Let me know your full thoughts down below in the comment section. And if you did enjoy today's content, be sure to smack that like button. Or if you're feeling maybe a little extra generous, you can always become a patron or pick up some merch over at rarecandytcg.com. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.